Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Active Breath. This is the MVM Miller Voice Method podcast featuring myself, Kyle Cameron, certified Miller Voice Method teacher, director of the MVM Academy, and my illustrious employer,
Scott Miller.
I've there he is.
I haven't heard that one before.
I'm gonna get better and better at these over time. I predict. I guess employer is not a word that we've often thrown around, is it?
No, I don't think of you as an employee for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Although it is technically true. Your name is on the bank statements.
We could have an entire episode of what's technically true versus what is in practice true.
You know what? I have a feeling that's probably going to come up again today because I think that will fold into this conversation we are planning to have today, which we thought it would be useful to kind of take a step back almost and just throw a dart at one of the big questions here, which is, what is voice? It's called the Miller Voice Method, and we have certainly done a lot of talking in our previous episodes about the work and the way it manifests and the way that some of the folks in this organization use their voices. But we thought it might be useful to really just zoom out and take a look at that big question. And then, of course, zoom back in on all the little tiny ways in which the answers to that question affect us, right?
Yeah, and the only caveat I would say is we're not going to go too far into the weeds of voice anatomy, et cetera, et cetera. But some of the basics might be instructive, I think, for any audience.
Yeah. I guess it feels useful to us to say that there are areas in which we jointly and severally feel expert and feel confident to say things that are correct. And there are areas in this where, like, we may not exactly be the expert. I'm certainly not a vocal anatomy expert. I understand the basics. And I know, Scott, you do a fair amount of research in voice science and in neuroscience, but that's not always necessarily your point of most interest and thereby perhaps point of most accuracy. What do you think of that assessment?
Yeah, correct. I think, always the case is that there's going to be someone out there, real or, mechanical, that will know that will know more. Not to mention the changing landscape of knowledge. So, we do what we can do.
Yeah.
We'll have JP on again at another time.
Yeah,
and he's next level. So we can go into more of the weeds when he comes on as well.
Yeah. So all of that being said, shall we do just a quick glance at what so in the teacher certification program, we break up the anatomy portion of our training into big body anatomy and small body anatomy. And again, this is not designed to make people experts. We're not doing any bell ringer exams about where these, muscles and things are. But my sense as a certified teacher is that you and the organization believe that it's useful and important enough for us to have a sense of the anatomical structure that produces the voice, because what we're working with is these sort of minute little changes that we as speakers have control over, but that might feel a little mysterious and ineffable if we don't know actually where these pieces of anatomy are. So what's your why did you put this anatomy into the teacher training?
Yeah, I think the key word you said was useful, meaning, if it's, we're training to use the voice. So if you don't know the component parts that are affecting or infecting the way you use the voice, then you're at a disadvantage. So there's technical knowledge about voice and frequencies and all the rest that is it really interesting if you're doing research and to some degree cause and effect, understanding it, but
Mhm.
but outside the realm of doable, right? Outside the realm of doable for the human to consciously control on some level. You know, a good example of that is the vocal cords or vocal folds. It's the same thing. I can't get into my vocal folds and start to vibrate them with my hands, let's say, right? Much
Yeah.
unlike the way if I saw a glass of water and I thought, oh, I want that glass, I can have the intention for the reach and somehow see my hand kind of doing that, and then through that knowledge, I can maybe alter what my hand is doing. I can't really do
Mhm.
that physically in the same way with my vocal cords. I can hear the representation in my voice, and then maybe change some other things that I have control over, which will then have an effect on what my vocal cords are doing. But I can't kind of go in there and maneuver them with in the same way that I can do things in the outside world. So we're focusing a lot on some of the non-useful part, the technical part, but mostly on the stuff that I can actually have some control over, and that I can physically augment in the moment.
Yeah, it's intriguing to me, the comparison to the glass of water. To me, like, there's a slight false equivalency there in that the analogy of the glass of water, that's external. So the hand is somehow both internal and external, right? It is part of me, but I can see what it's doing. And with the larynx, with the cords, with the arytenoids, right? These muscles and things that are inside of me, I cannot necessarily see what they're doing. Maybe that's the point that feels that makes it feel different from the hand. But I think it's interesting that we are training people how to manipulate these small muscles that they can't see. And so I wonder if there's a distinction between we sort of can't do that, or we're learning how to do that without visual context.
Yeah, I think
it's a bit more sensory, proprioceptory.
Yeah, I think there's two kind of data how can I say this? Places where we can intake evidence, right? Externally, we can feel how our rib cage is swinging, and then also internally, we can feel. I can certainly feel if my soft palate has raised. I can feel if my throat, or what we call pharynx, it's basically the same thing. The throat is widening or is squeezing a little bit. So we're talking. We're kind of teaching people to be detectives in both realms, internally and externally, to get the clues that something is amiss or working in the function that is desirable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think something that this method folds in a really nice way that I don't think all methods do is this idea of the external data. So much of this work, my lens on this work is almost always through acting, right? That's my bias. That's the world that I live in. But of course, we apply this to folks who do all sorts of things. But often it's about sourcing experiential information from our audience, whoever that may be, right? And then being able to coordinate, okay, you as my teacher taught me to raise my soft palate, release my jaw, open my pharynx, whatever it might be. So I'm learning how to do those internal calibrations and simultaneously mapping that over the data that I'm getting experientially from my audience.
Yeah.
So my audience might say, yeah, I felt really connected to the person. I felt like they were really going through something. I felt like whatever it might be. And so I can go, okay, so when I do that thing, it might produce this.
Yeah.
Right.
I think a car is a nice little analogy. There's an exterior experience, the road, what's happening around me outside the car, somewhat of an interior experience. Maybe I'm fiddling, maybe I'm feeling a certain way, or I'm daydreaming, or something is affecting my driving. But But there's that, and then there's the real time aspect, right? So we've built a nice car, so that is the training. So the car is, on autopilot, operating in a certain regard, but once and is flexible in that regard to the outside stimuli, but is also, in the moment, if something is not going exactly the way it wants to go, that the driver has some capability to make some adjustments in the moment. Most importantly, in the moment, in an unobstructive way, without getting in the way of the task at hand. And that's, as we connect to performance, I think that's the game changer, right? You can be in a voice class and get great training and really feel what it is and experience what it is to have a nice, open, flexible, musical voice. And then the minute performance starts happening, there's so much outside stimuli that the mind has to deal with, which we'll call duress, that requires a lot of attention, that a lot of the maneuvering in the moment, if you were really to concentrate on it, it would take away from in this case, acting, the task at hand. So the question in the kind of new training is, well, how do you bake that stuff in? So when that stuff does come up, externally and internally, adrenaline is pumping through your body, large amounts comparatively.
Yeah.
What are those internal adjustments you can make that are unobstructing or unobstructive to the actual task at hand? And a lot of that has to do with memory. And so a large component of our training really focuses on that aspect, which again is not unlike sports.
That's when you start
training.
Throwing balls at people's head or yoga blocks and things.
Sometimes. But we try more to focus on some of the things that are going to come up in a performance scenario.
Yeah, I mean, we do both. There's a certain amount of like metaphor going on. I mean, one of the exercises that a lot of my students have really enjoyed is the ball game. And the ball game is just literally standing in a circle and everyone has a ball and you throw a ball to someone across the way. And so, your job is to maintain active breath, right? This constant flow of breath with no holds at the top or holds at the bottom. That's basically our definition of active breath. While this literal experience of something coming at you is happening, So it's interesting. It's interesting to be inside that and feel all of that duress you're talking about, all of those sort of traditional sort of sports triggers, real world triggers, and how that can then again be sort of mapped onto the duress experience of performance.
Yeah, that's why progressions are so important in any kind of training, because in the ball game, for instance, it's very organized. You pick the person you're throwing to and who's throwing to you, so you have some sense of reliability. But even that, and to keep the group going is challenging. And then once you get pretty good at that, and figure that out, staying in the active breath, we start to add, more obstacles, which may be, you have to now articulate sound while you're doing it and stay in the active breath. Maybe you have to catch only with your left hand. Maybe the most important thing is that your partner catch and you don't care about whether you catch or not. Maybe the most important thing is that you catch and you don't care about your partner. All these things that are going to map real life. And that's for actors, but we do the same thing for corporate people, politicians, teachers. Everyone is coming with their sets, parenting, their set of progressions of obstacles. And then the question becomes, can you stay in a flow state while these things are happening to you or not?
I wonder, in light of this conversation about anatomy and duress, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about some of the places in the vocal mechanism, the vocal apparatus, where tension manifests, where duress manifests, where obstacles to flow manifest.
Yeah.
Is that a clear question?
Yeah. It's a big one. I would love to. There's so many different places, depending on the person, depending on their upbringing, depending on their culture, depending on their, so many different things. But generally speaking,
their literal anatomy.
Yeah, their literal anatomy. I mean, the good thing about the literal anatomy part is that more or less we're all built the same.
Sure.
with obviously exceptions here and there. But when you go to work on someone, you're more or less, it's not like you're suddenly working on a reindeer or
Right, of
a
course.
rat. So there's a basic foundation that's helpful. Frankly, it starts with the inhale. So how are you inhaling, first of all, in this robust way that we're talking about to support, to have a kind of supported sound? And are you inhaling by pulling in through your throat? And I love this example of kind of an upside down bicycle pump, which is, you have the hose, and then you have the mechanism or the canister, and then the tube, and then inside the tube there's a pad that's connected to a handle, right? And it's actually when you pull down the handle, the suction of that action is what pulls in air from the atmosphere. And we're built, somewhat, roughly the same way. It's not, like in a bicycle pump, it's not the hose that pulls in the air, right? And much in the same way, our hose idea there would be our neck and our throat. So we don't need to kind of contract our throat to pull in the air. We really don't do that. And again, unless there's some inherent anatomical obstructions, we don't do that generally when we're sleeping, right? What is happening is that the diaphragm internally, and we'll talk a little bit about the diaphragm, is moving up and down. And just like that little pad inside the canister that's connected to the handle, if you pull the handle down, that changes the volume construction inside the canister. And then all of a sudden air pressure, right, causes a swooping in of air into the canister. And then if you push the handle forward or towards the canister, air moves out through the hose and into the world. And so our body connected with our diaphragm is doing a large part of that work. The other big thing to think about is that air only comes into one place eventually, and that's the lungs. And we use kind of the imagery of air, like breathe into your toes and breathe into your back and breathe into your, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, even breathe into your belly. People say breathe into your belly, and like that's a useful metaphor, but it's not a fact.
No,
it's not real.
It's not real, right? Air only comes into the lungs, and then the chemical, factor of air. What is air? Gets dispersed through the blood system, et cetera. So sometimes these images are useful. Sometimes they're, I think, not, because I like to, depending on how you work. Some people are much more image based. Some people are more kind of anatomy fact based. But it's nice to offer up both perspectives to see what happens. So I would say that's the first point we look at is someone really tensing their throat. Because, the reality is if you've tensed your throat on the inhale, it's not suddenly going to release and open up on the exhale. It's like this.
Not likely.
No, it's like this idea of like, you take kind of empty calories into your body in food. You're not going to, in the export of energy into the world, it's not suddenly going to be, it's going to be affected. So we work on that. And then the other place we can kind of externally take a look at is what are the ribs doing? And what are the lower abdominals doing? What is the solar plexus doing? These are a lot of areas that have excessive tension. Now, it's really important to distinguish, so those things are being used. There's movement and the muscles are being used. But the minute we get into excessive muscle use, then usually the throat area starts to get tight. Now, why that is an interesting question. There's no anatomical connection between your ribs, your lower abdominals with your throat. But I think in the sense of coordination and what we've learned to do since, a very early age, this kind of domino effect starts to happen. And so we look at that. Are the ribs moving at all? Is the lower abdominals contracting, much like, if you went to a Pilates class, they're going to tell you to kind of really squeeze in and really contract those core muscles.
A Pilates class, I was taught in my young actor voice pedagogy to use the diaphragm. That's what I was told. And what that was code for, what I thought that was code for, was squeeze the belly.
Yeah.
Because that's where the support is, quote unquote, is going to come from. That what I've later learned to understand as the abdominal wall, the transverse abdominis, that whole thing, that's going to be the support of my big sound. So, and I think a lot of voice users are taught to do that either with the ribs or more often with the belly, from the diaphragm, is what these teachers say. And it's like, again, maybe there's useful information in that metaphor somewhere, but it often translates into tension.
Yeah.
For young professionals of voice use, especially.
Yeah, and here's where here's where a lot of the methodology was focused in the beginning, because coming out of sports training, what you really learn is that you work out in the gym to get those muscles that are going to be used strong and in many sports flexible, right? Flexibility is the key, because a lot of sports
resilient.
Yeah, resilience, but also a lot of sports strength is built on torque. So, right? So torque is a combination of flexibility and strength. So if you have a lot of strength, but you don't have a lot of flexibility, you're actually not going to have a lot of strength in the occupation of the task at hand, whether it's hitting a golf ball or swinging a tennis racket or throwing a baseball, right? Because you need torque in those occupations. So when I came into voice training initially, I saw a lot of that happening. And to be fair, if you do engage those muscles to some regard, you're going to get a different sound in the room, which may for some people sound more pleasing, more robust, et cetera, or
bigger, literally just bigger sometimes.
Exactly. But what I was finding also was at what cost, and usually it was at the cost of musicality, right? Vocal flexibility, the ability to move pitch and tempo. That was a deal with the devil. Like, your ability to move pitch and tempo went down, but your ability to make bigger sound went up. Now, we're all by and large constructed in a way that in an unobstructive, free-flowing way, we can all fill a theater with our voices. So we don't actually really need to concentrate so much on big sound. But as in the occupation of point of view, which I don't care if you're an actor, I don't care if you're a politician, I don't care if you're a teacher, I don't care if you're a parent, that is a large part of your occupation, point of view. And point of view is communicated through variance in pitch and tempo, right? I want the red car. I want the red car, right? I want the red car, right? That's it. That communicates three different desires, but in the same line of dialogue. Now, which one is your point of view? That is going to say something about you, your character, your desires, et cetera, et cetera. So,
it's specific. It roots you in specificity instead of a generalized understanding of just the text you're saying.
That's right. And who you are, this is a bigger question about voice, right? Like, it says something about who you are as an individual in that moment. So there you have a big, nice, vibrant, resonant voice, but then you don't have the accessibility to really maneuver it. Right, kind of like the car analogy. You have this, great engine, but then you don't have the accessibility to deal with the curves and the stops and the acceleration, et cetera, et cetera. So that became a big kind of cornerstone in the beginning of the work, and really testing, is it true what I'm saying? Can you kind of release and relax this lower abdominal area, right? In the way of, and release, relax, what do those words even mean? But in the sense of not purposefully contracting it inwards, can you not do that and still have a big, vibrant, resonant voice? And lo and behold, you absolutely can. But again, props to the people that came before us, because, especially in actor training, the old 20th century training model was a siloed approach. So if you were the voice teacher, your only job, in fact, you were reminded constantly that you were not supposed to talk about acting or anything outside of that. Your only job was to create this nice, vibrant, resonant voice, right? So, and that's what they did. And that's what they focused on. And that was the task at hand. Now it's different. We're asked to, or potentially we're asked to be much more flexible. The world's different. Our brain's different. We've talked about this before. we're much more integrated in some ways, much less integrated than others, of course.
Sure.
But in actor training, I think that's where we're wanting to go. So the diaphragm, you brought up the diaphragm. It's a great, I love the diaphragm. A lot of this knowledge that I have came from a guy named Carl Stow. And I never met the man, and I'm not sure if he was dead by the time I started studying him, but he was a guy in the 1950s, 60s. He was a voice teacher, and he started experimenting. And he was predominantly a singing teacher, and he started experimenting with a lot of the stuff that I'm saying. Like, what if you don't contract? What if you work in a way that really works the full coordination of the entire system? What if you do some exercises to make the diaphragm a little stronger and more resilient, but not in a way that has to do with tension, but in a way of kind of cause and effect? Like, if I do this, the diaphragm intrinsically has to rise a little higher, or be a little bit more active. Much in the same way as if we go to the gym and I'm going to do a bench press because I know those are going to affect these muscles, but I'm not going to do the bench press form when I'm going to shoot a basketball. Right. So those muscles are getting stronger, but when I'm shooting a basketball, my whole coordination needs to be in flow so it doesn't throw out the rhythm and the coordination.
And for me, it brings up the idea that when people often say from the diaphragm, it's sort of code for from the abdominals. Mm-hmm. They're because again, talk about internal muscles that we can't really feel. I can't feel my diaphragm.
Right.
I don't know where my diaphragm is from an internal perceptive sense. I can feel my abdominals. I can absolutely. And so when my teachers would tell me, from the belly, from the diaphragm, that was the thing that I could feel. And so interesting that Carl Stow was working on actually strengthening the diaphragm and affecting the way that we were able to control how our diaphragm worked, and so removing that sort of code or analogy or metaphor of using the abdominals. Yeah,
he was a fascinating guy. If you ever do any research on him, and basically he got brought into a hospital to work on with emphysema patients. And at that time in the 60s and 70s, they were blowing a lot of oxygen. Like, people were dying. They were using machines to kind of induce more oxygen into the body. But the dilemma was that that as how do I say this, as a kind of a knock-on effect of the deterioration of the lungs, the diaphragm was breaking down and getting weaker and weaker. So he and then people were compensating with all this kind of muscling and efforting to just try to kind of gasp more air into their lungs, which created other problems of coordination. So the returns really diminished at that point. So he comes in and he starts to work. Well, first of all, he comes in and he says, "How are you working to effectuate better breathing coordination?" And the doctors look at him and say, "What's better breathing coordination?" Now, this is like the 60s and 70s, and there's not much or anything written in the medical journals about breathing coordination. And he's like, "What?" And so he starts to work on these patients, and he gets them back into kind of a flow state of how breath works in the body, and how to start to coordinate the musculature around breathing, and then he invokes this thing called a whisper count, and we use this in some of our work as well,
extensively,
right? And the idea is if I just blow air out of my mouth, the glottis, or the vocal cords, this apparatus, we'll loosely call it, right, in the throat, starts to actually get a little tighter. And so that actually allows me to release less air. But the minute I start to articulate in any regard, and he did it on a whisper, right? So if we're out loud, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you would get to your kind of natural end of the exhale, which if you were just to blow air out, that counting gets you into an extended exhale So he was always like, people are focusing on the inhale, and he was focusing on the exhale because he was finding that people actually weren't exhaling enough air, right? To then inhale new air. So this idea of what we exhale is carbon dioxide, which has a kind of contracting effect on our muscles and fibers. And the oxygen we breathe in has kind of an expanding effect on our muscles.
Expansive,
yeah. So he was having people exhale more carbon dioxide. By the way, like he talks about a lot of stress and a lot of tension build up in people. His theory was it has a lot to do with the buildup of too much carbon dioxide in the body, which interestingly enough, makes some sense when you think about what doctors tell people who are dealing with hypertension or a lot of stress in their life. They usually say go out and exercise or walk or run or something, which gets, of course, your active breath going and gets you more into the cycle of more oxygen coming into your body. So anyway, so he gets these patients to do that, and all of a sudden, his patients are like getting up out of bed and walking around.
Wow.
And the doctors are like, what the hell are you doing to these people? And then the guy goes and works for the American track team, the American Olympic track team down in Mexico City because of oxygen deprivation and high levels. And he has a pretty storied career, but a lot of it is around. Well, let's talk about the diaphragm because we've brought it up a couple of times. I was fascinated to first learn that the diaphragm is like a pancake, right? And it completely bisects.
It's so big.
It's so big.
It's so big. I had no idea how big it was.
I know, and it's kind of like if you think of a contraceptive diaphragm. It's pretty much the same idea and the same model, right? It cuts our entire upper body from our lower body in half, right? And so if you think about when I work on this with students, the analogy that works for me is if I think about the ceiling above me, that ceiling is the diaphragm, right? Everything on in this room below the ceiling would be all your internal organs except for your heart and your lungs. Right,
all the abdominal,
everything,
right.
Your kidney, your gallbladder, your stomach, your colon, everything is below the diaphragm, right, except for your heart and lungs. Yeah. And then the next floor above us is where our heart and lungs are housed. And there's two basic, tubes going, loosely calling them tubes going, right. The feeding tube goes right through the diaphragm into your
the digestive system.
Exactly, and then there's the main artery that's bringing the blood from your heart, right, into the lower extremities, and then cycling back up into your heart again. And so that's why it's super important to breathe, because when you're breathing, you're moving your diaphragm. I mean, breathing in a kind of robust way, you're moving your diaphragm, and then the diaphragm, right, on the inhale, the diaphragm actually flattens out and moves down. So that is the distension. That is the kind of moving outward you feel in the stomach area. It's the diaphragm like a pancake flattening out like a jelly sandwich.
Coming down
on the inhale, right? And it is giving a massage to your internal organs. So again, the less you're moving that diaphragm, the less kind of blood circulation and massaging is happening to your internal organs. And then when you're exhaling, the diaphragm is moving back up into kind of its rested state, right? And then all those internal organs go back into the place that they were. So it's not so much that your stomach is moving in and out. It's that your diaphragm, when you inhale, is pushing all those internal organs kind of outward, and that's what you're feeling. And then going back into place on the exhale. And that again is that bicycle pump example, right? So on the exhale, that is you pushing that handle up into the canister, and that's what pushes the air out into the world, right? On the inhale, that's you pulling the handle down away from the canister, and that's what's sucking the air, out the external air into your body. Which, by the way, generally speaking, you do really beautifully when you're sleeping, right? And I often say, if you're sleeping with another human, once they fall asleep, put your hands on their ribs and you will be amazed how much movement there is. And then when you wake up and you're in the kitchen together and they're talking or whatever, put your hands on the ribs and you will be amazed how little movement is actually happening. Right?
Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think it's the domino effect of socialization, and a lot of it has to do with speed. If I really believe that my vocal utterance it has a scarcity attribute to it, like I have to get the words out fast because people are going to cut me off, or else, right? Which again, we will have a separate segment on parenting at some point. But at the end of the day, no matter how loving and I don't know what the words are, but allowing you are in the household, there usually is not some misunderstanding who the power holder is at the end of the day, right? So there's some restriction that has to be learnt by the child in order to coordinate their vocal expression. And that usually starts with some kind of manipulation in the breathing coordination process. So, so what we're seeing is a knock-on effect of a kind of socialization. So which doesn't happen when you're sleeping, right? The anatomy is the anatomy when you're sleeping, but the minute you wake up, you're having to deal with a lot of social modeling. So, and then coordinating, and a lot of the old habits start to come back, and which eventually, the last thing I'll say is it eventually brings us higher and higher, more towards our throat and our tongue and our mouth as kind of the box, as the sole use box where everything gets generated, right? As opposed to the reality that the pressure that is causing the vibration of the vocal cords, which we'll call air, is happening in the basement, in the engine room, potentially. Right.
So I had a thought just then. You were talking about speed and you were talking about socialization. And sometimes when folks get into MVM, we put them in, Wall V, we put them in these sort of luxurious exercises that are a lot about relaxation, and they're a lot about recoordination. And, you get them up out of Wall V, and they have this very breathy, slow, sort of wide sound, right? I think some people think that that's what MVM is.
Oh no.
And so, and I don't think that. But to get back to this idea of speed, can you talk a little bit about, can I have a full released, relatively unconstricted, information-laden sound coming out of my instrument fast? Or does that have to be slow? What's the correlation there, do you think?
Yeah, I think everything you speak to is simply about point and process. So again, to use a sports analogy, if I'm teaching tennis, and which I used to do. So the first thing you do is try to slow everything down for the person, because if you give a person a tennis racket, they've usually seen people play tennis and usually seen really good tennis players play tennis, and it's going at such a pace, right, and such a level that they want to replicate, right, on some level. Yeah. So immediately, that's just what the instrument does. It sees the kind of end result of a thing, and then with no other information tries to replicate the end result. Well, that's a terrible idea to do that, right?
It's a risky idea, right? It's risky.
Yeah. Well,
because some people are actually able to replicate at speed. Like it's not impossible to be able to do that. It's just really rare.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would argue at what cost? Meaning there could be a cost of sustainability, there could be a cost of integrity, there could be a cost of specificity.
I sometimes wonder if that's what talent is. What we call talent is perhaps the ability to mimic and replicate something, execute something expediently without having to think too much about the component parts. And this, I think this is why talent only carries anyone so far.
Yeah.
Right? There might be a natural aptitude, but you still, if you want to get to this level of whatever we call elite, performance, communication, whatever it is, you're still going to have to get in under the hood and look at all those component parts and see how they all fit together.
Yeah. That's why I call talent work ethic. I don't really buy into this propensity argument, and I agree absolutely. Every individual may have more or less propensity to acclimate towards some activity, for sure, right? Yeah, whether that's right in the genes, whether that's seeing the example growing up, et cetera, et cetera. But at a certain point of proficiency, like, everybody's good. Like, everybody can do, whether they got there because they had propensity, whether they got there because they had a work ethic of more attempts than most people and adjustments. But in acting, at a certain level, everybody's a good actor. Like, everybody's a great actor at a certain level. So it's not really about that. It's about work ethic, and it's about adjusting to the current moment of information, which you can't really ever plan for because every moment is new, no matter what, right? So that's where your health, your mental well-being, your perspective, your relationships, all these other kind of intangibles that don't necessarily have with how exact is your forehand. Like, think about tennis. They're hitting thousands and thousands and thousands.
Well, this is one of the things that happens in podcasting world. My computer just froze. Well, my software just froze. Fortunately, it happened, I think, while I wasn't talking. Unfortunately, it was happening while Scott was talking. So we're not sure exactly where that thread left off. But we're going to do a little reboot here, fair listener. Thank you for holding our hand and sticking with us on this. We're going to sort of try and pick up where we left off. But I think in a true MVM kind of way, we're not going to try to control that too much. So I apologize if this isn't the smoothest transition of all time. But Scott, you're still there?
Yeah.
Excellent. We were talking a little bit about how MVM... I was asking about, is MVM fundamentally slow? Is it possible to be efficient and quick? We were talking a little about talent and aptitude and breaking, training being something about breaking a system of actions apart to look at its component pieces. That's kind of where we were. Scott, do you want to pick up any of those threads and keep going?
Yeah, I was using the analogy of tennis, and I think it's instructive. We talked about the beginning tennis player seeing a professional tennis player and trying to replicate that, the dilemma of that. Exactly. And the other part of that is, what happens is a person has a tennis racket and there's a ball coming at them and they want to try to hit it. And that's kind of the name of the game, right? So what happens coordination wise intuitively is the shortest distance between 2 points, right? And that is not necessarily going to give you power and control, right? Doing it that way. So much in the same way we talk about voice, the shortest distance between 2 points may be to speak as quickly as you can and get that utterance out as quickly as you can, but that may not necessarily give you power and control in the scenario. So what we have to do in the beginning is really focus on building a stroke and what that is, and then the redundancy of the basic stroke model, right? And just really getting them to focus on that, and then within that, certain indicators. How do you know because you're not going to always be with me to tell you that the stroke is off or it's operating in an efficient way. So what are your internal signs that you can start to see whether your stroke is efficient or inefficient? And so you start to build some awareness with them and their bodies. And most importantly, you try to get them not to focus on where the ball is going. Because that's the results that, again, their mind is going to try to kind of shortcut. And to get to that end, So much in the same way, in voice training, we're trying to kind of break down the component parts that when we build back up in a much more efficient, fluid, strong and flexible way, those things like dominoes eventually will unconsciously click into place when it sees an external stimuli or it feels an internal stimuli. Much again, we're not inventing anything new here. That is the way the body has learned to operate in an uninformed way, with an eye on the prize in its beginning. Understanding of use in not only voice but in body, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, again, point and process. We're if you see this kind of image, what most people are doing, and this is not anatomically accurate at all, but we'll use this image that what most people are doing is they're vibrating their vocal folds or cords. Initially, right? They're gripping or grabbing initially in the idea that that's how you produce sound with very minimal air pressure or airflow going through the cords. So what we try to do in the beginning is completely reverse that effect, right? Which is a little bit strange for the brain, right? So yes, of course, in the beginning, you're going to get kind of a breathiness within the exercise itself, but we have to kind of quiet down the habitual constriction and attack that the muscles want to do when it thinks about hitting the ball, right? When it thinks about winning the game, when it thinks about desire and point of view, when it thinks about all those things, because the mechanism has been built in a way that all these other things get, start to grip and hold and happen to achieve that end. So then we, in breaking down any progressions, we make a new end. Okay, the new end is, can you just get airflow moving through your vocal tract? I don't care if you can vibrate sound right now, because that's not the end we're after in this exercise, right? So can you do that? And then how do you do that? What in your body do you have to shift and change to make that happen? Oh my God, now you can do that. Great. Now we're going to start to bring back some of the muscularity that helps create vibration in the sound. Oh, whoop! No! You did the old thing again. Oh, see, the minute you thought about sound, where did the breath go? Where did et cetera? And that and then as they get kind of coordinate muscularity, movement of chords, and breath flow, and those two things kind of meet at the same time, then we can start to play with the duress of intention, the duress of moving the pitch range, moving the volume range, all of those things. But if those become the endpoints in the beginning, they're just going to do everyone's going to do the old coordination, which is just like hitting the hell out of the tennis ball, and your shoulders tight and your elbows out of whack, and your footwork stinks, and then you hit the ball and you're just seeing if it went in. But the meantime, what you're taught to do in tennis in the beginning is, after you hit the ball, you got to run back to the middle of the court. That's what you got to do. You can't stand there and watch where the ball goes. Right. So that's not intuitive at all. All you want to do is hit and see where the ball goes, and stand there and watch, and then the ball comes back and across court, and you've lost a point. So, just because it's intuitive, it doesn't mean it's actually helpful, right? Because you have to start to investigate, what is that intuition? What is the goal of the intuition based on? Right? Because most times when you're first learning how to do something, the kind of end gaming that happens, again, as a child, the dilemma is the overbearing parent that is really, myself included, that is really trying to get the child to do something that would be end gaming, right? And that's really all about me. It really has nothing to do. And then the poor child is trying to figure out how to please the parent, and they're going to try to do it as quickly as possible and not get the punishment and get liked, and all that. It produces so much internal anxiety, and the way it usually manifests in the body is through contraction. And then we get the voice we call our own, which is this kind of contracted, inefficient, squeezed model that we're producing or trying to produce.
But it feels
sound.
so familiar, right? Because we've built it and it's been with us, it's been inside us this whole time. There can be a lot of identity and a lot of selfhood wrapped up in the experience of that sound for us. You know?
Yeah, and I think the for us part is really the essential piece, because especially in acting, you know, most of the actors I see audition or begin training, what they're actually trying to show me is that they can feel something. Now, how, which of course is not what acting is at all about, right? The audience can feel. We don't need you to feel. We need you to do. The audience can't get up on stage and start doing action. We need you to actually act. So, but again, you know, it's funny, in actor training, I talk to most actors and I say, okay, so where did you first fall in love with acting? And they say, oh, I saw this great blah, blah, blah. I went to this great blah, blah, blah. And I was saying, and I was like, oh, you fell in love with acting as an audience member, as an observer, because it made you feel something, right? It made you experience a feeling or an association, right? So of course the young actor at the beginning wants to try to replicate that, because that's the closest association they have with acting. But that has nothing to do with acting, right? So that has to be trained out of the actor, right? Because again, the minute I try to show you that I'm feeling, what's my barometer? My barometer is tension. That's how I know that's happening, right?
It's the lump in my throat.
Exactly. So, and that tension just gets the way of information transportation. We don't want that tension. We want you to transport information so we in the audience can actually have our own experience, right? But the minute you're kind of contracting yourself so you can feel yourself have that experience, that's where information transportation starts to break down. And then the audience watches you have an experience. Now, I may be like in awe as an audience member of like, wow, you have a lot of access to that emotional instrument of yours. But but I would argue that's not what I should be thinking about when I'm watching a play or a movie. I should be in some kind of mild trance state of like my own life, remembering, you know, things about my own relationships, questioning my own ethics and mores, you know, things like that. Not watching your good artistry of acting. So yes, familiar. It feels familiar. And as a young actor, or, you know, I would argue when I get very upset at the children and I lose my temper and a lot of tension starts to come up, I wonder how much of that is me trying to verify that my point is correct. And in order to do that, I have to feel myself experience something, because I'm not getting the data from them. They're not doing what I want. So I have to get the pleasure from somewhere, right? But again, for the task at hand in parenting, that's not actually useful, because you want the child to have the experience, or at least a kind of symbiosis of experience between you and the other. But if you're kind of hogging all the experience through all your tension and your rage, or you're crying, or you're recessing, or your nothingness, or whatever that thing is that is keeping information from transporting between you and the other human, we're actually then not in relationship with other. And other could be a human, other could be nature, other could be anything that's outside of us, right? And when we're not in relationship to things outside of us, then I think we're in trouble. We're in big trouble. And of course, we see a lot of that now. And of course, with the screens, that's a challenge, because we think we're in a relationship to something outside of us, but we, this thing is it just keeps stoking our relationship with ourselves, and I worry about that, and I wonder about that. It's like the more we get the feeling of I'm relating with myself to myself and what that feels like, then when I go outside and actually try to relate to nature and the things around me and all the products of nature, humans, etc., how do I know how to do that? Besides just kind of checking back in on myself and making sure I'm feeling good. It's like, you know what I mean? So it becomes this loop, this feedback loop that is really based on myself rather than what is actually happening outside of myself. And a kind of insensitivity starts to build from that, So it doesn't surprise me we are where we're at in that regard.
It's interesting to me that this is a conversation about voice, which is fundamentally, tell me if you agree or not, fundamentally, my voice is something that is me, that is intrinsically me, that is coming out of me into the world. And so therefore, my voice and my experience of making sound, having a voice, is a fundamentally personal experience. It is about me. That is about me. My voice is about me. My expression is about me. But in that conversation, we're talking about information transportation. We're talking about communication, parenting. We're talking about the experience of existing in the world with another person, with other people, with communities, with audiences. So I don't know. I find that really, there's a paradox in there somewhere, that I think is really fertile. We're learning how to look at our own instrument, our own instances of tension, of constriction, where those may have come from, how to remove them, what it feels like to operate as a vocal instrument with that constriction and then without that constriction. That's all very internal work. It can get very solipsistic, I think. Mm-hmm. It can be very, very much about me. But what I think is so fascinating about your approach to this work is that, yes, we're doing all of that internal stuff, but we're also focusing so much on the why of it is to have a more holistic, authentic relationship with all of this external stuff.
Yeah, precisely. Again, point and process, right? So like you said, there has to be a kind of, going away and reassessing how you're using, your resources. Because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on this. I don't know how you do that when you're in the muck of the fire. How you can really, as an animal, in a vulnerable way, reassess openly when you're most vulnerable. I just don't see other animals do that, and maybe there are animals that do that. I don't know, but I don't know that it is reasonable to expect. Again, this goes back to a lot of training, like the old 20th century training of berating and yelling and screaming at actors or performers to get them to do better, right? And again, I say, okay, but at what cost? At what cost?
Yeah.
You can get anybody to jump, but at what cost? And what I see, what I saw when I went through it myself as a student, was that it kind of built a codependent relationship between me and the trainer, which is that, oh my God, you got me to do this when you were yelling and screaming,
do it unless you're
right?
here.
Exactly. And so I was just having this conversation with a private student, who has a very accomplished career. So it's not like they're a beginning actor, but it's like, that old kind of 20th century model got the actor to breathe, right? Got the actor in a heightened state of stakes. And it's like, and then everyone was like, yes, my God, there it is.
That was so
right?
incredible. Yeah.
Right? But essentially the teacher, unknowingly, but essentially the teacher was trying to get you to breathe, right? And to be in some kind of flow cycle and flow state.
Alive.
Right. So you could, you could be involved with information both internally and externally. So and so that worked, right, in that regard. But the question is, what do I do when you're not around? Do I have to always go to those extremes to experience this flow state? What do I do when I'm playing scenes that don't have these extremes? Oh, maybe I'll just be more emotional then, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So then,
whereas I think. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, so that is one of the reasons why we look at what we look at. Is like, okay, that's a pretty high cost. Now, how can we get you to the place where you don't need me as soon as possible as a teacher, right? That's the goal. The goal is unemployment for the teacher. That's the goal.
Yeah.
So how can we get you there as soon as possible to do that? And then the goal for the teacher becomes a consultant. Like every so often you drop in if there's something extraordinary or you want to do a check-in.
A tune-up.
Yeah, just like a dentist. You don't want your dentist to be with you every single day watching what you eat. Right? You don't want your doctor calling you up every morning. Did you do this? Did you do that? Et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But you do go in for checkups. And I think of it much in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting, the word sensitivity was coming to mind for me, that like that experience of being the acting student who's being screamed at by the teacher, at its most quote unquote effective. Yeah. Like it's maybe it's what it's doing is putting me in fight or flight, whatever it's doing, but it's making me aware of my surroundings and my input in a way that's somehow making me more feel or appear more sensitive, more reactive.
Yeah.
But I feel like what we do in this work is offer another way to be sensitive, which is to be perceptive to information.
Yeah.
And that is as simple as the active breath. And it's just sort of, I think it's an interesting irony of the voice and the study of voice and the question of what is voice, that mechanism of staying porous, staying sensitive by way of keeping the airflow flowing just happens to be the same mechanism that creates the voice on the way out. I think that's maybe what is so fascinating about this particular study. They just happen to be the same ingredients, the same anatomical parts.
Yeah, and I think that's really the reason why that became my personal entry point, because I looked at movement, I looked at basic acting and the principles of acting training and the history of acting training, and still I saw a hole, which is, okay, you can have all those things, but if your basic fundamental operation and coordination of breath and sound making is not intact, all these other aspects will have diminishing returns to some degree. I think about the tennis analogy, and part of the training when you get to very high level tennis is to stay focused and reactive in the boring moments, in the boring moment of a 20-stroke rally, right? Not to make the simplest fundamentalist mistake in your form while you're doing that in that long rally. And also when that moment comes where you can put the shot away, or you're defensive and you have to react at the net intuitively, how much access do you have to the reactivity in your body at that moment? That's what you're training, right? And much in the same way, we're training the same thing. It's how can you get your body in the state that it can be highly reactive, intuitive, and responsive to the thing that's coming at you, or to the thing that is being produced inside of you. Because for the tennis player, it's the same thing. It's like, oh my God, this is the most important point of the match. Now that's internal pressure. The external reality, is non-existent. The crowd is still the crowd. The court is still the court. The net is still the net. The racket's like, those external pieces of information have actually not changed. Your mind has put a different spin on the relationships between those pieces of information, right? So the internal training is when those moments come up, chemically even speaking, what is your adrenaline doing? Like how much are you producing? How does that happen? What are you thinking of? Where are you putting your point of attention? All that stuff is an internal training to then, achieve potentially some external results.
Which you'll only be able to do if you're perceptive to the moment when the opportunity presents itself.
That's right. I mean,
you haven't lulled yourself into a state of absence.
Right. That is the rub, right? I can only be the most authentically responsive self when I am really sensitive to the outside pieces of information. So to know myself, I have to really know other. Right? And today the dilemma becomes, the idea can be, to know myself, I need to know more about myself. Which, let me get more information about myself. Which and what I mean by that is, let me go on the websites that I really love, because that's more about myself. Let's go on the things. Let me get my online friends of only the people that I agree with. That's learning more about myself. That's actually not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about taking in, holistically all the information so you can know more about yourself and your own personal predilections. And then you get some perspective, right? And with greater perspective usually comes greater ease, because we're insignificant. We are going to be gone in a second. We are all going to die. We don't matter. All the things
Spoiler
that we
alert.
think were so important are not actually important. And talk to terminal patients who have accepted the fact that they're going to die soon. We're all terminal. I mean, by the way, right? We're all terminal.
By the way,
they just happen to know more or less, idea about what a date is going to come. But they really start by and large to let go of the large majority of we in the quote unquote living pay attention to. So why is that? Right? That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily equate with despair.
No.
It doesn't necessarily mean an abdication of the world. It just provides greater perspective and room for at its best anyway. I mean, some people do go into despair for sure. That definitely does happen. But at its best, it allows space for more information.
Yeah.
More scope of information.
Yeah, that's why the caveat when you've reached that point of acceptance, right? Because there's a lot of phases until that moment actually happens. But
of course,
my wife had me. She pulled me to watch the last episode of The Big C. Have you seen it? I think it's on Netflix.
A few episodes, but I haven't seen it through the end. Spoiler alert, folks! If anyone hasn't finished this TV show from 5 to 10 years ago, just mute the next part of the podcast.
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm really not going to give anything away. But there's a line in that show that really points to what we're talking about. And she, it's the last episode, and she's having a conversation with her bastard father, who she never got along with, and suddenly. The show's about this woman who has terminal cancer, and she the father's sitting down, and the father says to her, "Why are you being so nice to me all of a sudden?" And her response is, "Because I have nothing else to lose." And I thought, that's it. That's it, right? Right, all the machinations that we put on and do and construct physically, mentally, is because we believe we have something to lose. And the most fundamental part of that of loss is life. We believe perhaps on some level we believe we're never going to die. So we're fighting against that inevitability of that loss.
Well, I mean. Yeah, that's everything. I mean, you do have something left to lose, which is everything that you know.
That's right.
But somehow when you accept that that's going to happen anyway, it somehow sort of has the opposite effect.
Well, that's the ridiculous nature. It's going to happen every day anyway. Like this thing we're
but it's not a reason to give up.
No.
It's not. I don't think it's advocate.
No.
A reason for giving up.
Yeah,
exactly.
Quite the opposite. It's a reason to live. It's a reason to enjoy. It's a reason to let go and not to take things so, seriously in the sense of permanently, not to take things more permanently
and personally.
Yes.
Right. Like it's not just about it's not about my experience of the world. Yeah. It's like we should take things. I think we should take things seriously, but not necessarily on the only level that is easily understandable, which is my own personal experience.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, you know what? I think talking about death is a great way to end this podcast.
We
talk about death.
Wait, I want to leave with one fun fact though.
Yeah, please.
Because this really blew my mind when I found this out. So the voice that I am hearing speak right now, coming out of my mouth, sounds different than the voice that you're hearing. So
yes.
So when you out there, when you're speaking with somebody, you're hearing your voice, right? But it's not the same exact sound that the other person is hearing. And I thought, man, what a great metaphor. Like, we try so hard to be seen. Some would argue that's the only thing we're ever doing is trying to be seen, right? And like, give up the ghost, man. Like, it comes down to the voice. Your actual sound that you are hearing coming out of your face,
which you think is you.
Right, is not the same thing the other person is seeing. I thought, man, what an amazing construct this is. It's perfect. Yeah. It's perfect. So anyway.
Lots more to talk about. If you are curious about Mailer Voice Method and what kind of offerings we have going on, please come to our website, mailervoicemethod.com. That was poorly articulated, but I think you got all the consonants in there that you probably needed. We are currently running the MVM Gym, which is 2 weekly 1-hour classes led by a certified teacher. Just a sort of somatic practice. Come on in, check out some exercises, have a conversation about your technique, your form, things you're discovering. And that is Wednesday evenings, 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, and Saturday mornings, 11 a.m. to noon. You can buy a 1-class drop-in or monthly pass. That is running until about mid-March. We have a new level of teacher certification starting up level 1 in the late winter, early spring, I believe. So go to the website, check and see if there's any sneak peeks coming up. You can have a chat with us about what that program offers and entails. Anything else coming up on the radar, Scott, that you want to plug?
Nope, not top of mind.
All right, folks, we will see you in a couple weeks. Thanks for chatting with us. And we're also going to put together an email address. It doesn't exist just yet, but we are going to find a way to get an email address out to you. So if you have any thoughts, questions, things you want us to talk about, profound disagreements with the things that we are saying, please, by all means, write in. And we would love to engage with you, fair listener.
Love it.
So until next time, thank you so much, Scott.
Thank you, Kyle.
See you in a few weeks, folks.